What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how state is actually handled a little bit differently in iOS from moving forward with SwiftUI. So usually it's something like you would set like a property and you would set the value directly to the property. That's not what is usually done with declarative UI, and we're actually going to have to make this shift into managing state a little bit differently. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to, we're going to do the most basic project that I can show you. This is actually a project that's similar to the Flutter. Like if you ever played with Flutter, it's similar to the starter project with Flutter. So I'm going to just do that in iOS. So let's go ahead and start up a new Xcode project. All right, so single view application as usual. Biggest thing that you want to do when working with SwiftUI is just make sure that you have use SwiftUI. Very important thing to do because there's two separate delegates. There's a scene delegate and an app delegate. I don't know the differences at this time, but I'll go back over those in a different video. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a project. Call mine Simple State. Oh yeah, we're going to keep it simple. And you know where I'm going to put it. KL Learning, baby, because that's where I learn you. All right, so we're opening up to our new default view, or our default whatever. This is our new view controller essentially. This is garbage. You don't need this unless you're running on Catalina and you want to see the side-by-side preview. I'm not running Catalina, so I don't need it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just simply going to create a counter, and it's just going to update a label. So we're going to have a label that has like some call to action text, and we're going to have a label that's going to display how many times we've tapped on a button. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create two. Well, let's just start with the call to action. All right, just simple text. So this is kind of like a label, what we're used to calling labels. And let's go ahead and run this in the simulator. So we should just see a pretty much blank screen with a label in the center that says your counter is now at. It's showing that, right? Now what we want to do is we want to add another label under it, which is going to represent our counter, and we're going to have our counter start at 0. So in order to work with, placing elements in this new Swift UI, what you have to do is you have to work with what are called stacks. You have a H stack and a V stack. A H stack is a horizontal stack. A V stack is a vertical stack. Since we're doing up, we want to do up and down. That's a vertical stack. So we're going to place this in a vertical stack first. So let's do that. All right. So now we've wrapped our text object in a vertical stack object, and you'll actually notice that the syntax is very different from what we're used to. This is essentially creating these objects essentially have an initializer, which is taking in a closure. So that's why you don't actually see anything after this. It's kind of doing it like something like this. Since there's a shorthand, you don't have to do the parentheses. It's essentially saying that you're not taking in any other arguments other than this closure to create this object. So that's why it looks a little bit funny. But yeah, so if we go ahead and run this, we should see the same exact thing as we saw before. So as you can see, it is the same exact thing as we saw before. Nothing really different at this point, because in our vertical stack, and stacks are just like our stack views, what we're used to with UI stack views, and you're just specifying which way it's going, whether it's vertical or horizontal. And the reason why it looks exactly the same is because it's just a stack view, and you wouldn't usually expect anything to happen with the stack view. So let's go ahead and add another text element into here, and we're just going to set it equal to 0. It's just going to be like a label with a 0 in it. All right, so as you can see, we're not doing any commas or anything like that. We're just placing elements directly in there, line after line. And this is going to be the new kind of syntax that we're going to have to get used to. And as you can see, we have our original one that's your counter is now at, and then we have the 0. Let's make that 0 look just a little bit sexier, adding a little bit of styling to it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a function which is called .font, and then you pass in essentially an enum to it, and there's an enum called large title, and that's just going to make our label big and sexy. That's what it's going to do. See, look at nice, big, and sexy. All right, So now what we want to do is we want to also add a button down here. So let's go ahead and go back over inside of our VStack because it's still going to be in a vertical stack. We're going to add an add button. So let's do that now. All right, so as you can see, we added in a button element, and a button element is actually initialized a little bit differently. So it takes in an action, essentially what you want to happen when you tap on the button, and then it takes in a label, essentially what you want it to be called, right? So what we have to do is we have to, oh, and also make sure that when you're doing autocomplete, that you don't just press enter on the label. You want to have the syntax look like this, and because it's causing some type of weird error. I'm not really sure why. Can't explain it right now, but just make sure that you don't do autocomplete when you're building out a button. But let's go ahead and give it a label, since that's what Xcode's crying about right now. All right, so we add in another label, and this is just going to essentially, we add in a text element, which is essentially going to stand for the label that it was expecting. It was expecting to get back some type of view type element. I don't know what to call these. They're called widgets in Flutter. I kind of want to call them a widget, but I don't want to use the wrong syntax, so I'm just calling them an element for now. So you're going to pass in this text element, and that's going to make all the problems go, or it's going to make Xcode stop crying. So we're going to jump back over, and now we can see that we have all three of our elements right there inside of this stack. Let's get this add button a little bit further away. So we're going to add a little bit of padding at the end of the button, once again using that dot syntax. So we'll just add like 20 for the padding, and it kind of spaces it out a little bit. So this is kind of how we're laying out the elements. So now we have our UI all laid out. Next, what we want to actually do is whenever we add, we want it to increase a count. So in order to do that, what we have to do is we have to go back over here inside of our content view, and we need to create a stateful stateful something. That's what you need to create. You need to create a stateful something. I don't want to call it an object because I mean, it kind of is, but you'll see what I mean. All right, so we have this new keyword called @state, and this is essentially saying that you know, before we were able to just like access a label.txt and set it, you know, or we would just do a regular counter. We would do a regular counter up here, and there wouldn't be this special keyword for state, right? It would be everything except for this, right? So this, it would normally look something like that. But now with declarative UI, you actually have to set specific things as being stateful, because what's actually happening is this area, the body, is constantly being rebuilt. So essentially what's happening is as this is being rebuilt, it's just going to be reading from whatever's set as stateful. So this is the only thing that's actually kind of being stored in memory in a way. I'm going to do some more research. I'm going to come out with a better explanation and break it down for you. But just keep in mind that in order for you to store values that you want to be able to change, you're going to have to add the @state keyword. So now that we have this counter, all we want to do is for our text, we want to put this in here because we want to display the counter. But since this is an integer, I don't think this will actually work. So we need to make sure that we wrap this as a string, and then that will allow us to pass in the counter as a string, just like you would have to for a text property on a label. And then we also want to give our button an action that's going to increase our counter. So we're going to say counter plus equals 1. And since we're in a closure, we do need to do self. Now, I did try to do weak self right here. Didn't work. Have to look into retain cycles and stuff like that in SwiftUI. But yeah. All right, so now what we have is we have our action, which is going to increase our counter. So since this is staying in state, what's going to happen is this is actually going to not be essentially rebuilt and set to 0 every time. It's going to be able to increment. And then all this stuff is going to constantly run, like it's going to keep running. And then, or not necessarily keep running, but every time it's building this view, what it's going to do is it's just essentially going to be reading from our value, which is counters, and since it's stateful, then it's going to be displaying the correct value. So let's go ahead and add that, or let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. So we do the add, and bam, we got some magic. So as you can see, it does seem to be working, and yeah. If we wanted to, what we could do is we could add a subtract button to the right of this add button. So I'm going to just show you that real quick, just to show you that how the stacks continue to work. So remember that we have the button right here, right? So what we could do is if we want two buttons side by side, once again, use a stack. We're going to use a H stack, horizontal stack, right? We're going to grab all of this and we're going to just move it up into that H stack. I'm going to use Command, Option, and then the square bracket to the left to move it up like that. That's going to allow me to move all my code like that, so we don't have to do the copy and paste. Once again, if we run this, we're going to see the same exact thing. Remember how we saw the vertical stack do nothing until there were more elements in there? Well, all we have to do is essentially do the same thing. We just need to add another element. So let's go ahead and add another button like this. And instead of plus equals 1, we'll do minus equal 1, and we'll say subtract, right? So we go ahead and run this, and now we have add and subtract, and you'll see that it's automatically doing the spacing or whatever. So we do plus, and then we do minus, and you can see that we're able to control those. So this is essentially the basis of state management now using declarative UI and SwiftUI. It's going to be a definite learning shift. I wanted to kind of go, you know, my videos are always slow. I always like to explain everything, but we're going to have to go through a learning shift, guys. It's really important that you start to understand that we are going to start seeing iOS apps be built extremely differently. Start doing your research because this is going to be just a huge paradigm shift in iOS development. As I start learning things, I will cover more. I'm still looking into a lot of stuff, but I need some of the guys that are better at coding to cover this stuff. And then I could probably relay the information in maybe a way that I feel might explain it a little bit better. But yeah, they're gonna have some of the keynotes or whatever. They're gonna have labs and stuff like that this afternoon, and then after some of that information releases, I'll be able to understand this stuff a little bit better, put out more videos for you guys. But if you like SwiftUI, please give me a subscribe, because I'm going to be covering this extensively. I'm loving SwiftUI, and I'm all on board. I'm all on board. So give me a subscribe. I'll definitely have you have more videos coming out as time goes by. And yeah, thanks for stopping by. Keep coding passionately.